Hey folks, Mr. Dell here. We are looking at a problem that has to do with graphing or describing a story based on a graph. So, given a graph and showing the trajectory here of that line, the data in this graph, can we come up with the story of what's happening? So, this is from CPM, and this is course 3. This is the closure exercises, right? So this is closure 1-68. So it says Zeke lives 30 miles from his aunt Zelda and is riding his bike home from her house. It says interpret the graph to tell a story about what could have happened on his ride home, right? So if we look at our graph and try to make sure we get some sense of what our graph represents, we see that the y-axis here, the vertical axis, represents distance from Aunt Zelda's house in miles. So Zeke starts here at Aunt Zelda's house. That's why it's at 0. And then the x-axis represents time in hours, right? So as we move forward, time is moving forward. So there's hour 1, hour 2, hour 3, hour 4, hour 5, so on and so forth, 6, hour 7, 8. So we see what's happening. So between hours 0 and 3, he is steadily getting further and further away from his aunt's house, right? So this is his distance from his aunt's house. So as this climbs, he's getting further away from the house to where it looks like maybe if we figure out that path, that point there, looks like it's at 3,20. So being at 320, that means that in 3 hours, he traveled 20 miles. And he did that at a steady pace. So we could start off and say that Zeke travels 20 miles at a steady or constant rate during the first 3 hours. There's my this interprets this here, okay? And then we see what happens. Well, what happens? You notice time keeps on ticking, right? So from this point here is at 3. This point here looks like that's also at 5. It's at 5, comma 20, right? So it for 2 hours, from 3 to 5 is 2 hours. So for 2 hours, he stayed at the same distance. So we could say then he rested for 2 hours. You could get creative and say he was at a restaurant at that point and ate dinner, or he was at a movie theater and watched a movie. He stayed put for 2 hours. Then from there, we see what happens is he continues to climb again at a constant rate. It looks like at 8. And then if we maybe put the line here, that's probably there at 30. I could say that's at 30. So that point I would interpret to be 8,30. So what happens is and then for 3 hours, he travels again another 10 miles, right? So we can say then he travels 10 miles in 3 hours and reaches his house. Because then you notice it's staying constant again. So he's at his house in 8 hours. He reaches his house in 8 hours. All right. So there's a possible story of what happened based on this graph.